Hi, everybody. I'm so excited for this panel. I have been finding such a happy space this summer, but like within the last few years specifically, within graphic novels. And so I'm really happy that we're being able to do this from the panel to the page panel. I'm so happy with all the authors that are with me. I've loved all of these graphic novels. Just a quick bio about me. If you don't know who I am, my name's Lily, and I'm the person behind Utopia State of Mind elsewhere on the internet. Just as well, before we talk about the author bios and these stories and the Q&A, I want to mention that there's a Q&A portion at the end. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them whenever you want in the chat. And also here we don't tolerate any harassment or hate speech of any kind. And our goal is to create a really safe space where we can talk about all of these fantastic things. So just know that if you are engaging in any of those, you will be removed and blocked. So that's that's it for me. And now I want to have the authors say a little bit about themselves and their books, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. So do you want to start, Liz?
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting this, Lily. My name is Elizabeth Ajamine. I'm the writer and illustrator of Fibbed. Is this upside down? No, it's not. So it's a middle grade graphic novel about Togo Nana. She goes to spend the summer visiting her family in Ghana, and there she discovers magic in the village forest. And she has to team up with Anansi, who is a mythical character in Ghanaian folklore, to save the village forest and its magic from a group of greedy contractors trying to steal the magic and sell it for profit.
You want to go next, Molly? Oh, sorry.
I pulled up my book. I'm ready.
Okay, yeah.
I'm Alex Castellanos, the author and illustrator of Isleta Island. This is my debut middle grade graphic novel about a girl who grows up in pre-Castro Cuba, and when Castro's revolution happens, she is sent from Cuba to New York, where her world drains of color, and she needs to find a way to bring color back into her life. That's her story.
And I'm Molly Brooks. I did the Sanity in Tallulah series, and I also recently illustrated Catherine Ormsby's book about obsessive compulsive disorder and childhood and all the other terrible aspects of middle school. And that's it.
Okay, so I'm going to jump into the questions. I am going to read them off of my sheet because there's no way that I could possibly remember them. So if anyone sees that happening, that's why. I wanted to talk first about belonging because I felt like it was a central theme in all of your graphic novels, whether it be through our ideas about like belonging to home, so belonging to a place, or belonging to our community, or like a place within our family. And so I wanted to know, what does this theme mean to your story and your characters? And do you find yourself coming back to certain themes or issues in your work kind of as a whole?
I can go first. I think belonging is such an important theme in Fibbed. Before Nana spends her summer in Ghana with her family, she's kind of getting in trouble at school a lot because she's telling all these stories and no one believes. And so she's kind of feeling like she's not heard in her home. And then when she goes to spend her summer in Ghana, there's like a language barrier, there's a cultural barrier. So she's kind of feeling like she can't express herself. So I feel like, really diving into like the different ways you can find your voice and find a way to be heard within different communities was something that I was really thinking about. And for Nana, storytelling is how she's able to, feel like she belongs and able to share, her stories. And she kind of learns from talking to her grandmother and learning stories of her own culture that, there's a connection between the different ways we communicate, and that learning stories of other people can help you understand yourself and also, understand another person. So that's kind of where belonging really ties to Fibb's story.
Wait,
oh. Is it gonna be?
I'm very excited for this.
Okay. Belonging is important to Marisol's story, and like you could tell she doesn't feel like she belongs because her world drains of color, right? So it's unfamiliar. and she doesn't really connect with anything. And the way that she starts feeling a connection in this new home is by finding the things like, so back in Cuba, she loved nature. She would go to the botanical gardens. And even though nature looks entirely different in New York City and Brooklyn in the middle of winter, that's what gets her to feel like she belongs. And she's also bullied by the students at her school. So at every turn, she's not finding connection. She doesn't share a language with her foster family. So she's struggling to find belonging and connection throughout the book. And I think the point of the story is that she can't find that until she finds herself, like until she's like good with herself. And I think like that that is how I felt growing up. I moved a lot as a kid, and that could be really challenging, ending up in a new place and then having to like assert yourself and make friends. And the only way you can really do that is by knowing who you are and what you want. And one of the main inspirations of this story, not main, but like a big one, is my best friend, Sasha. And she told me when she was like in kindergarten or something, she was like, you know, thrown in school, you're not friends with anyone in kindergarten, you're meeting all these kids for the first time. And the way that she decided to make friends was just to go around the playground and go up to kids and be like, do you like nature? And the kids would be like, what? Like, it was such an aggressive question. And the kids would be like, no, leave me alone, weirdo. So she finally went up to a girl and was like, do you like nature? And the girl was like, okay. And she's like, all right, we're friends. So like Sasha knew who she was. She was like a little nature kid. And that was like how she made friends and connected with people. So I think that was kind of my soul's journey, is figuring out like, okay, what's that thing for me? And for her, it was like nature and cooking and food and dancing. And figuring out how to bring that into this new life that she now has against her will. So it allows her to feel like she belongs there and she's like made a new home for herself.
I think that the story of like finding belonging is so beautiful. And I think it's like such a wonderful theme in both of your books. Like they tackle it in different ways, but like that is like a very core concept, and it's so lovely like watching the characters find that. In Sanity in Tallulah, I did the series kind of as my own like wish fulfillment of like what I wanted like a community to be like. So it's not a central theme in that it's something that the characters are looking for. It's something that they already have. Like every character in the books pretty much is just very accepting of every other character and just kind of takes their quirks and differences in stride and just goes with it, because that's how I feel like community should be. So that was kind of how I envisioned the world around them, and then they get into mischief like inside of that very accepting environment. With Growing Pangs, the idea of belonging is central because Katie, the main character, feels very outside because of all of the anxiety that she has. She feels very separate from everyone because she is so afraid of so many things and afraid of letting anyone know that she's afraid, and that the like fear holding her back from reaching out and trying to make connections and trying to like create community within which she could feel safe about like the ways that she's different. That's something that she comes to terms with through the book. So
do any of you feel that there are other like certain themes that you're really drawn to, or that you feel like keep coming up as well besides belonging? I don't know, for me, I think the belonging is probably like my favorite theme of all time, you know, like found family, kind of finding your place, etc. But I was
so
wondering
universal, like everyone wants to belong in some way or another, even if they like want, like if they're like in love with their own uniqueness, they still want to have some sort of like found community for themselves to like be embraced by. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just wondered if there are also other themes that like you keep coming back to as well.
I think for me, it's kind of history. I've like it was always my favorite subject growing up in, and I always kind of want to talk about history in different ways. So like for Infibbed, I talk about the kind of the history of like colonization, imperialism through kind of this like magical setting, and it's like being able to like talk about environmentalism and like resources being taken from, and in this case in the book it's like this corporation is stealing the magic from the forest and trying to sell it. And part of the story is that in order to like, I don't know if it's a spoiler, but like in order to like kind of confront what's happening and like show everyone what's happening, Nana has to like learn more about her tradition, because it's like they're stealing the magic, and it's not like the magic isn't, you can't use the magic, but there's like a tradition and a culture here and a richness there, and the corporation doesn't care about that. So that's kind of why the forest is dying. And so being able to like speak back to culture and history in my stories is something that I think I always go back to.
Yeah, I also pull a lot of inspiration from culture and history. And like, as I mentioned, I think maybe in the back matter of my book, like I didn't grow up with like folk tales from my family. I grew up with stories about their life in Cuba and like their immigration stories. So I was always really interested in Cuba because it was, for me, like this, it was the fairy tale land. Like that was where all these stories came from. So I've always been really interested in that. And it's always inspired my writing. But I've always written, I think I end up always writing characters who feel like other. Like I always really like the play Medea, because that's her whole thing, is she's the other in the community. And I always really like those characters that feel like they're on the outside, or they have one foot in one place and another foot in the other, whether it's like a magical thing or it's like literally someone who comes from two different cultures. So however that plays out, I really enjoy that dynamic in stories and exploring those kinds of characters. Yeah.
I'm really fascinated by troubleshooting and problem solving. I really like watching characters extricate themselves from an extremely complex situation. So my writing process is usually like, step one is coming up with like the most bizarre like problem that I can figure out for them to just like be stuck right in the middle of. And then the book is just them like working their ways out of it. And I really I like listening to books about that kind of thing, and I like solving problems myself, and I like the process.
That's so interesting, because that's the complete opposite of my problem. Like of how I write is like I usually have like a character moment that inspires it, or yeah, it's usually like a character moment, and I'm like, okay, how do I make this a story? And then I have to like reverse engineer a problem to put them in, and that's always the worst part. I'm like, I just
the exact
want my
opposite.
characters having fun.
I have to come up with a problem, and then I have to like use that problem and figure out like how I want it to be solved, and I kind of reverse engineer from that what kind of character would behave that way. Like I find characters extremely difficult to come up with, so I have to think of the scenario and then like figure out who would get themselves into the situation.
That's so interesting. That's cool.
Yeah, I think that kind of shows, because even like reading Sandy Tallulah, it's like, how are they going to get out of this? And like everything always just gets to the next layer. So that's such an interesting way that that's how you develop your story.
Yeah, I feel like that's a perfect segue as well to one of the things that was striking to me about Sandy Tallulah as well, like the stakes of space, I feel like. And so I feel like that like jives really well with what you just said about what you like to do and have this like problem, because I feel like the smallest things in space that could go wrong end up being huge kind of life-threatening problems.
Yeah, it can snowball so quickly. That's what makes it really fun, and like you said, easy to like raise the stakes higher and higher and higher.
Yeah.
Because if all else fails, you can just like drain all the oxygen.
Yeah.
And then we're really in trouble.
So what was it like to create that sci-fi world, kind of both visually and yes, with this narrative focus and like narrative problems?
Well, one part was how do I put this? It's not, it's much more on the fiction side of science fiction. Like it's the version of space that they're in is much more of a like Star Trekky, like kind of like goofball sort of space. So it's almost like space is a metaphor, like more than it is like literal Apollo 13. Like I want the flavor of Apollo 13 and figuring out, oh, how do we get home? But also I want, you know, taffy matter and giant three-headed cats and that sort of thing. So I based a lot of the like like the space travel and space living on like long haul trucking and like camper vans and that sort of thing. Like I when I was trying to like build this community of like the space station that they're living on and that sort of thing, I wanted it to have the personality of the people that were living there. So it's very adaptable and very like egalitarian and like homey. There's lots of knitwear. Uh, but I wanted it to feel like there was like an underlying utility to the whole thing, like you know things folding out of the walls and you know bunks set into nooks and crannies and just having that we're in a vehicle but we're also living there long term kind of vibe.
Yeah, your point about knitwear is really fascinating because on this very, very baby mini tangent I'm going to go on to, I was reading this article about the Matrix and specifically about the clothing. And
Oh
like
yeah.
where when you just said that, it immediately made me think of how they talk about that exactly what you're saying, being like super utilitarian and like you don't have the resources to just go out and like make new clothes all the time, right? Like you have to have these longer lasting pieces of clothing that stick with you. But that's the end of my baby tangent because I
Well,
did a lot
knitwear
of
is also a great metaphor for community and belonging. It's like I've seen it described as a verb for warmth. And space is very cold, and it like knitting something for someone is a way to like show your love for them. And there's a lot of downtime in long haul trucking and space travel. So like Tallulah's dad knits, and you see him knit in a couple of the books, and she wears a lot of goofy little sweaters that he has knit for her.
I wanted to ask a little bit, Alexis, about your book because one of the things that struck me, the first was the color work, but the second one was its balance of words and no words. And so I wanted to ask if this was always like, did you always know that it was going to be like not have as much dialogue? And so also, was there any like reservations for that, like within the process, or any challenges within the process?
I got this idea for the book very quickly one day because it was part of like a school assignment and we were like very quickly having to come up with a bunch of different book ideas. So I had thought to myself like, oh, you know, think of something you already know about. Okay, Cuban history. And what's a part of Cuban history people aren't really familiar with and that would work well in like the children book realm. And I thought Operation Peter Pan because it's about children. And so that led me immediately. I cannot tell you, it was just like immediate how the story came to me. It was like a girl goes through Operation Peter Pan. Her world goes from color to black and white, and there are no words. And I knew those things at the very top of it. And I was adamant from the beginning that there was going to be no dialogue in the book. And so when I was querying, I had the script, I had some sample art. And I think maybe a couple agents were like, I think, you know, maybe you should write a version that has narration. And I was like, no, you're not the agent for me. You don't get it. And then it landed with my agent, Marietta, who is Cuban. So she read it and immediately understood what I was doing with the story. It was like, yeah, no dialogue. Great, let's go. And I was like, awesome. Yeah, someone gets it. Because it's kind of like crazy being like, yeah, I want to write a book and there's going to be no words. And so when we were on sub, I definitely got feedback from some editors who were like, this needs words, or at least this needs some words. And I was like, nope. Like but you know, since this was my first book, I was like, there was a part of me that was doubting it. I was like, maybe I should, like, I really want to sell this book. I really want to sell this story. Maybe I should try a version. So there were a couple of times where I sat down and I like tried to do like narration, like maybe Marisol in the present day, like now going back and telling this story. But then I was like, no, the reason why I didn't want to have any narration to lead the reader through the story is because I wanted to mirror Marisol's experience to the reader. And I wanted the reader to experience that lack of communication themselves and kind of therefore be able to like have empathy for Marisol in a different way than you would normally have reading a book about a character. So it finally landed with my editor, who's Cuban, so she got what I was doing. And she was like, yeah, no worries, sounds good. And so the only words you really get in there are like onomatopoeia. There are 2 dialogues, but they're both the same thing. They're just someone saying her name or her saying her own name, like I am Marisol. So yeah, it was from the beginning, and I fought for it. I really didn't have to fight that hard. I just landed with people who were like, yeah, do it. So I was lucky in that way. But I was really nervous. I was like, are people going to get this? Like, because it's about a part of history that like most readers picking up this book won't know and won't really have the context for. But the point of this book wasn't to teach people about Operation Peter Pan and to teach people about Castro's revolution or to teach people about Cuban history. It would be maybe like in my hopes and dreams, like maybe intrigue someone and make them interested to go on their own journey to educate themselves about this part of history. But like, that's not what this book is about. So yeah, I wanted it to be about building empathy for Marisol in a different way. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and I think that's also one of the reasons why that book has such a resonance, because I feel like while there are elements that, not everyone can specifically relate to, in terms of history and maybe culture as well, I feel like when you are starting to learn a new language, or if you're in like transposed, I guess, in space, well, not in space, but I mean to a different place, not in like actual space, losing your ability to communicate and to express yourself and like relate to the world through language, I feel like is like the first thing that goes. And it's the first thing that makes you feel so helpless and so like powerless. And I felt like that was one of the ways, and like a twist, that you're so sort of like insightfully able to communicate that in like a very easy, like, oh, this is what it feels like and this is how it is. I don't know, I'm getting really emotional, so I have to like rein it back in. But yeah, that feeling is so kind of easily and like deeply communicated. Something that you were talking about earlier, Liz, was the idea of history and stories. And stories are huge in Fib, both like true stories and both like not true stories. And so I wanted to know if you could talk about why that theme is so important to you in relation to Fibbed, and maybe why you are drawn to like the idea of differing perspectives as well in stories, so like the relativity perhaps of stories.
Yeah, so in Fibbed, it's kind of throughout the book, Nana learns traditional Anansi stories from her grandmother. So I was kind of retelling those stories and then also kind of putting my own spin on them. So like sometimes I would combine a story, or sometimes I would like, I'm doing the art for the characters and like the folk tale. So that's also like interpreting those stories in a different way. And I thought it was like a really important part of like the book, because Nana wants to be a storyteller. She's supposed to be going to her summer camp and telling stories that way. And me, myself, like, my family came from Ghana, I came from Ghana, and then we moved to America. And like the different ways people understand storytelling is so interesting. Like even on a craft level, like you have, the 3-arc story or the 4-arc story, which is not Western. And so like there's like this idea, I guess, in like Western society about like storytelling that is important is the, only journalism. And then whereas like in African culture, it's stories about people, stories about lessons, and just like Nana being able to merge those two like really important different sides of storytelling. As someone who comes from 2 cultures, she's able to use like the like kind of journalism lessons from where she grew up to also like help share the stories that her grandmother passed along with her. So to me, it was kind of being able to talk about the different like important different ways of learning about stories, learning about people in a way that kind of uplifts, you know, different experiences and perspectives of that.
Okay, so I had a question that we were going to talk about, which was how do you begin a graphic novel? But I feel like we've already said like a problem or a character moment. I was wondering if there are any like other ways that you've had that everyone has had like an idea for a graphic novel or like a story in general.
My writing process, I really crystallized it, or like I really cemented how I approach writing stories when I was working on Isleta Island. And I know a lot of authors really hate writing a synopsis. Like that's the worst thing you can ask them to do. But that's how I start all of my stories, is I write a synopsis. And so that's how I wrote Isla, is I wrote a synopsis. And then from there, I just start expanding it and I expand it and I expand it. So Isla, I wrote a synopsis. And then I wrote a longer one that went into like scenes. And then once I had figured out like pretty much all the beats in the story, I went through and I was like, all right, I think this much action is going to happen on a page and then this much. And then once I broke out the entire thing into pages, I then went through and I took the pages apart into different panels. And so that's how I continue to write even prose to this day, is I write a synopsis and then I slowly build it up to the point where I'm like, all right, I think this is a chapter and I think that's a chapter. So it's like kind of pantsing and kind of outlining. But that's how I approach it. And then lots of Excel documents to keep track of drawing the pages, because there's so many pages and so many steps. So just lots of graphs with lots of like actual graphs, so that I feel like I could type in, I was like, I did 3 pages today, and I could see it go up and I'm like, oh, progress. Because it can be really hard. Like when you're writing a book, I feel like you're like, okay, I wrote 2,000 words and you feel good and you see the words on the page. And then when you like ink a bunch of pages, you're like, I still have so much work. Like there's still so much left to do on this page. So being able to like put something down and see a little graph go up was like really, yes, I did something.
My graph is in my sketchbook and I colored in with marker like a child, but my process is actually very similar. I do a very, very detailed outline, and then I take the outline and like I draw like 4 by 5, like 20 tiny boxes in sketchbook pages, and I do a little very, very rough drawing of every single panel in the book, like hundreds and hundreds of panels. And then I number them all, and I place all the panels on the pages, like 250 or however many pages are in the book.
Yeah, I have a similar process. When I was doing Fibbed, I actually like had stopped doing like kind of like comics for a while. So like when I was younger, I would just make a lot of my comics, and none of those I ever wrote the story. It was just like the art would take me where it took me. And so when I was trying to like go back to, like when I do my prose novels, I do outlines and stuff like that. But when I was trying to like go and make a comic, I was like, I don't think I can just sit here and like try and draw like this story and just like figure out what the art takes me. So I kind of like incorporated that like the outline structure, and like I wrote a synopsis too, and then I like the script was from the outline, and from there I just kind of built on the characters and everything like that. So it's definitely a lot of Google Tasks. That's what I use. It's like I create like a like calendar and like just like tasks for every page, like every step of the process. So
wow.
Yeah,
I have like someone somewhere did like a Google Sheet formula where you could put in like your deadline, you know, how many days a week you want to work, like cushion, like 5 sick days.
Oh, is that Carrie Peach? Did Carrie Peach do that maybe?
Maybe, I think so. And so I adopted that for my process, and I love it. It does all the math. I could be like, I'm 23.7% done with the book. And that like having all that numbers and stuff digitally. I can't work on pencil and paper at all. I need to have all my process digitally. That's like amazing to me that you're able to like thumbnail and do all of that by hand. Because I couldn't keep up with all of that.
I don't pencil by hand. Just like the very first little like goofy thumbnails.
Even those. For me, it all has to be digital. I cannot.
I think though, Molly, like because in terms of like page turns, like having, I did like my pencils by hand. So like you doing it in your notebook too, I felt like being able to like draw on the page kind of helped me like in terms of like, okay, this is how the spread is looking. But I also like, I did half and half. So I did the sketches all first by pencil, and then I scanned them, and then, inked that and stuff digitally. But yeah.
I
Oh,
found
interesting. I do the inks in real life, actually. I print
Oh,
out the
wow.
pencils on blue and ink with a nib, and then I scan the back end.
That's incredible.
It's so
So
fun.
much respect.
I love talking process. Everyone does everything so wildly differently.
Well, I started this book when I lived in a New York City apartment, and I was like, I can't work traditionally in here. I can't. And then I was working on it in a 1-bedroom apartment in Seattle that was cramped, and I was working from home. Like my workspace, I did this entire book on my very uncomfortable couch. So like there was no space to do any process by hand. And also like I don't have the patience for it. And I'm just so impressed by both of you. But I have an app that has the page of your script, and then it has the like a very bad drawing interface. But I just did all my thumbnails there, so it didn't need to be a good pencil or anything. So that way I was able, because that was something I was concerned about with this book, since there was no dialogue. I wanted to make sure the pacing was as tight as I could make it. So being able to do my thumbnails along with the pages and then being able to flip through it digitally, at least, was something that I needed to do.
Yeah, I agree. Talking about craft and talking about process is so fascinating as well, because it is such a visual, like story and pacing and communication is so different when you have the ability to use visual art, but also there are so many different considerations that have to be made in order of what you show people and what details are. Something that I was thinking about as someone who would never, ever, ever do anything in art, ever, like ever, cannot stress ever enough, is how do you approach honing your own like art style, or I'm not sure how real artists describe it, but like your signature drawing style, or like the style that you feel most comfortable with. Like how do you hone that, or how do you approach that?
For me, I think you just said it. It's whatever you're most comfortable with. You can try to like come up with a style, but if you're like pasting it on top of like the way that your brain wants to spit drawings out, then it can be very cumbersome or feel or look artificial. So I think a lot of what people call style is just like, I don't know, this is just how it feels correct to draw for me. And a lot of my style is based on a quick way to draw that feels efficient and actually ends in a finished book. So if I was going to like have tidier lines, for example, my lines are kind of loose and sketchy, because if I tried to have very clean, tight lines, then I would not get the book done.
Yeah, likewise, my drawing style is I'm lazy. I don't have a lot of patience, and the last 80% is where I give up. And at this point, like I have a day job, I do freelance. I don't need to spend 20% like frustrating myself over finishing something. I'll just good enough. No one has to know I stopped at 80%. Like in my mind, I know maybe I could go the full 100, but I'm just going to stop at 80% and I'm going to call it good. And that's where I'm going to leave it. Because I value my sanity. But I think I always see someone's always sharing some kind of graphic on social media that's like a Venn diagram that's like my style, the style my friends like, the style that I like to look at. Like there's never any overlap. So that can be frustrating sometimes as an artist, is like the thing that you feel comfortable and that feels good and that you do. You're like, oh, but I wish it looked like this other cool thing. But that's just not the way I like to draw, but it's like what I like to look at. So sometimes for me, style can be frustrating because it's like, man, wouldn't it be cool if I did that? It's like, no, I can't do that. I'm going to stick to what I do really well.
Yeah, I feel like there's always like the vision of what you want your style to be. And I feel like I had that when I was like trying to come up with like the character design for Fibbed because it was my first full-length graphic novel. I was like, I had a different style when I was younger because I liked a lot of anime and manga and comics. And I was like, but this feels very specific to like a different culture and a different setting and a different like format. So like, how can I figure out like my version of what is comics? So I spent a little time like trying to figure out like drawing the same character in just different ways and just like feeling what I felt comfortable doing. And in terms of like perfectionist, I think like I love the like small little details like that come when not being perfect, and that I think is like the style because it's like when I was using like certain programs, it was like, okay, I actually have to close the line because it's easier for me to like actually fill the art, the color when I'm doing this. Okay, this is going to be part of my style. But like I love like in terms of backgrounds, that's where I had the most fun because it's like you can just be a little bit more silly in terms of like how I was drawing the program. Is like you don't have to fill in everything, and then I think kind of the negative things also tell the reader something about the story and the world. So I feel like instead of negative, I mean like negative space, like, oh, it's not like, not everything is filled out. So I think style is just like the imperfection kind of makes it your own and like owning that.
Yeah.
Uh,
The way Alexis was talking about her style, I really felt it, and I wanted to say that like that extra 20% is just like it's self-loathing and it's not helpful. Like it's because it's style is like the thing that comes naturally to you, but that makes it feel like cheating. Like that makes it feel like you're being lazy or you're not trying hard enough because every line is not just like a struggle, but like it's your style because every line is not a struggle. And you should like be aiming to not make every line a struggle. And that's really hard, like as an artist, like trying to like convince yourself that it's okay, like the way you're drawing and like that you're not forcing yourself to draw in a different way.
And I also feel like coming from doing prose and graphic novels, I think like it's kind of similar for writers too, because it's like if you give every writer the same sentence, they're gonna not say it the same way. And I feel like that's the same artist. If you give every artist the same like figure to draw, they're all gonna just bring something different to the table. And I think that's what makes it the most interesting.
But I will say the frustrating difference about like being an illustrator and also prose writing is the way that you can immediately see like leaps and bounds of improvement over time as an artist. Whereas with a writer, you're still improving, but it's not that same like visual, like when I first started drawing this book took me 1.5 years. So by the time I finished drawing it, I was so much better than when I had started. So there were like some panels that I had to redraw at the end, and I would be like, ooh, this doesn't totally match because I got better. Like in the past, I had a client who like a commission, I had done some characters prior, and then I did some like 1.5 years later. She was like, oh, they look different than the ones before. I was like, yeah, it's been almost 2 years. I'm better now. Like for her, it was like the style's different. And I was like, no, I'm better now. So it on the one half, it's great because you could see your improvement and it's wonderful. But on the other half, once you have something published, you're like, oh, I see all like I could do so much better now. And it's a lot more frustrating as an artist to be able to see that so vividly, as opposed with words. You're like, yeah, I got better at constructing sentences and constructing stories, but it's more abstract.
I totally feel that. Like, oh, go ahead, Molly. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's why I always start penciling and then inking the book at like page 20 or so, so that the first 20 pages don't look.
That's really
I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that from now on. That like, is such
the
a good
bad
idea.
ones are hidden in the middle.
That is so
strong and the end strong.
I was gonna say, like, I was like, when I finished, there's this one page that was like, I did it when I sold the book, and then it like stayed the same from when the final. But like before I had sold it, I had done it in a proposal, and I was like, I like was showing people like, look at how bad it was, and like look how much it improved, and they're like, it's just a different style. I'm like, no, I like worked really hard to like get it to be different. And it's so funny because it's like getting feedback on art is like, I feel like a little bit different in terms of writing, because it's like this was like before, like I used to do fan art, and like one of my fan arts like was online. So then you see like random people like talking about your fan art, and then like the feedback was like, oh, like this style isn't like good or whatever. And I was like, you don't know how hard I worked and how much I've changed. Like I also know that there's a lot that could be changed here, but it's so much better from what it was. And like, I feel like feeling that pride of knowing like you're changing and growing as an artist is like kind of helps when it's like not everyone is loving your style, or like people have different tastes in style. And even myself, like some of my favorite panels are like not someone else's favorite panels in my own book. So
Something that you brought up earlier, Liz, was like background and sort of setting in background. And I wanted to ask all of you how you approach filling in like the setting or the negative space in your graphic novels, because I think that those are also so rich and they're so kind of telling of parts of the story as well. So I'm really intrigued on how everyone like fills in the bits behind the people.
I go first because I love this question. My background is in theater, so my degree is in theater design, and I spent a lot of I really loved theater design. I love costume design. I love set design, and then I worked as a scenic artist. So I've always just been. I really love that aspect of storytelling, is like filling in the world around characters. So when I was working on this graphic novel, I approached designing Mighty Soul's world like I would approach designing for a play. So I built a 3D model of her house in Brooklyn, and I built a 3D model of her house in Havana. And I built some of her furniture, like I made 3D models of it, and I like laid everything out. And then the props that she used a lot, I had 3D models, and I had lots of references for her, since the background was going to kind of help to reinforce like the time period for her, and also fill in details for people who, like, since the book didn't have language, I wanted there to be information for people who knew more about this like time period and these events in history, and then also for someone who wasn't familiar with would still kind of get what was going on. So like something I'm thinking of right now is, let me turn to it really quick, this spread right here, where it's like after the revolution, 1961, you see Castro and you see some other things. And like, as someone who doesn't know anything about Cuban history, you're like, oh yeah, like not good things are happening, right? But my grandfather read this page and he immediately knew the events I had drawn. This is a very specific thing that happened. This was the bombing of a ship at the harbor in Havana. And this is the bombing of a department store in Havana. And like, I didn't write that. Like, there's no way to know that unless you're familiar with the history. So I wanted to put enough information in there that people who know and understand would be able to pick it up, and that for anyone else, there was just enough on the surface to understand what was going on. So I wanted it to be level, like deep enough, but not alienating to people who don't understand. And then also just drawing really cute mid-century modern furniture and decor was like such a treat. Drawing locker bays, though. Hate drawing locker bays, and never want to draw another book that takes place in a school ever again, because I hated drawing locker bays. But the backgrounds were so much fun, getting to add in all the little details and the little Easter eggs. Like there's an Easter egg for all of my family members in the book and my friends and stuff, and that was like, that's where the backgrounds where I get to play and have a little bit more fun. So yeah, those are honestly my favorite part of the book.
Sanity and Tallulah was great for this because I got to like build their entire spaceship and all of the space vehicles and that sort of thing. I used SketchUp and made 3D models in the computer that I was able to like rotate and stuff, because I wanted it to, the sense of place to feel very like grounded in reality. So I wanted to be able to like kind of move through the space and make sure that it felt like they were interacting with stuff. And I wasn't great at SketchUp, so I was very limited in like the angles that I could figure out how to make. But that was good actually, because I based the aesthetics a lot on like older technology, because I wanted it to feel like kind of an outdated space station. So big influence was like old Nintendo consoles and stuff like that, with like, you know, they have the kind of like angled slice out of the edges and like you know, parallel vents and a lot of cords everywhere and stuff like that. So a lot of the fun of Sanity and Tallulah is them like scampering through all of this like weird patched together technology.
I love hearing all about the different ways you guys created the backgrounds. For me, my book was set in Ghana, so a lot of it was like I had gone to trips visiting families, and I would just like take photos. And like I feel like sometimes when you like are drawing, you use a lot of reference photos, but like when you search like pictures of Ghana or like pictures of like an African country stuff, you usually just get like sad people or something that doesn't depict the culture or the community at all. So I felt very lucky to be able to go home and just take photos and like kind of bring to life the like really vibrant setting that I know is actually in Ghana. So SketchUp and building models is truly incredible. And yeah.
I like bouncing off of what you said. So finding reference images for New York City in the 1960s, easy. Super easy to find those reference images. But finding reference images for Cuba in the 1950s and the 1940s was a lot more challenging, especially because a lot of those pictures just end up being the rich Americans who went to Cuba for vacation. So it's all their like lush, lavish vacations in these hotels in Havana. And I was like, no, I want to see what people's homes look like. And that was like a really challenging part for me about research. I have like some family photo albums, so I use those for inspiration, but like actually finding a lot of the inspiration for like what's the interior of schools would have looked like back then was really hard because those photographs don't really exist or are very, very difficult to find. I have, like you see there, I have one of my reference books, which is pictures of Havana then and now. So I did have to like find like out of print library books sometimes to find some reference images because going online, I wasn't finding the reference that I needed for Cuba at that time.
And even like as we were speaking, like the fact that if you like, I guess most people aren't able to travel to places like you weren't able to go to Cuba to do your reference. So like just knowing that the internet, when you Google like countries that are not like, America or England or whatever, and then people are not seeing the community and people, they're just seeing like in terms of like when you Google like Ghana or Africa, it's like either huts or just like mansions. Like this is not depicting like the true communities and the true people. So like I felt like it was really a highlight to be able to bring that to a book and bring that to a story because it's like I hadn't seen that. So I'm sure there's so many different books that I pulled on, but it was nice to be able to be a part of contributing to like showing a different part of Ghana and like the many stories that there are out there.
If anyone has any questions, also drop them in the chat. One question that I saw, which was really interesting, was how do you overcome creative burnout? And so, yeah, as someone who's probably been like creatively burnt out for probably like 2 years now, I'm very interested on how you all overcome creative burnout.
I draw ridiculous fan art that is that creatively revives me often. Or I'll knit for a little bit. Just something different that can give me a little, like rush of like, oh, I did a thing. Like finishing a small thing and having that reward of like, oh, I made the thing and now it exists, can be very motivating and like, make bigger things seem more manageable.
I don't feel like I have a good answer for this. I like injured my hand while working on this book, so I had to really step back on how much time I spent using my hand. So things like I used to cook a lot, and cooking was like a form of expression for me, and I really loved doing it. But cooking and spending too much time in the kitchen causes hand pain, so I've had to like step back from that, and I think like resulted in this kind of depression where like I couldn't do a lot of things that I enjoy because they cause pain. And part of that is drawing now. Like drawing causes pain and then I get really sad about it and then I don't want to draw. So it's like a mix of creative burnout and just like injury burnout. But I feel like I also have a day job that's creative. I'm a graphic designer and I also freelance as a graphic designer. So like I am really pulling from that creativity well, like regularly. And so I think I'm just kind of still in the middle of burnout or trying to figure out how to deal with it. I mean, I listen to audiobooks a lot now, and I just play The Sims, and I literally just build houses. I don't even do anything with The Sims. I just build houses, and then I don't finish them. And then I open it up, and I'll just start building a different house, and then I won't finish it. But like I just sit and I listen to an audiobook, and I just get to zone out and not do anything, which I think for me is an important thing because I constantly have to be doing something. So being able to put myself in a situation where I could just kind of like not do anything and listen to an audiobook and be entertained, because listening to stories is always going to be something that refills my creative well. But yeah, I don't think I have a good answer for this. It's just like, I don't know, take care of yourself. Just find a way to take care of yourself. It's so important, like writing, drawing, all of this, publishing in general takes a lot out of you mentally, physically. So just set boundaries with yourself, with other people, listen to your body and try to do your best by it.
That was really great advice. So yeah, I wrote an actual whole article about it that's going to be coming out, but I think it's kind of hard to be able to do that when when your hobbies or your art is how you can survive, or you also have a day job. It's like you have to be burning so many fuels or engines, whatever the phrase is. You just have to be always producing or something like that. So I think it's kind of hard in terms of like financially, circumstances. So that's always something that you kind of are thinking about. For me, I also, Molly, do very similar. I just like, watch a lot of movies, watch a lot of TV. I just like, because when you're creating so much, being able to just enjoy the work of other people, like reading books and stuff like that, that helps me a lot, because it's like, I'm just going to be cheering what you're doing on, and I don't have to worry about like being overly analytical about like what's being made and stuff like that. So I think definitely, like Alexis, what you were saying about like knowing your boundaries, taking time for yourself. And I think it is really hard though, because it's like, when your art is also how you also survive, and just like in general, like being able to work and stuff like that, you kind of always have to make that balance. But at the end of the day, there's only one you, and there's many jobs, there's many projects that can come out. So it's like, take care of yourself, because you're the person who is the most valuable thing. It's not just what you make.
I do want to add something. And I think friendships help. Having friends and community help a lot, because I'm thinking back to like when I had sold this book and I wasn't able to write anything else, and I was like trying to write and I couldn't really get there. I think being able to let yourself be creative in a space that there are no expectations, that it's all just for fun. Because I'm very much a person where like I get a hobby, a talent or something, and I'm like, ooh, could this be monetized? Could this be a business? That's how my brain works, unfortunately. Capitalism. But I started playing D&D with some friends, and being able to just like hang out with some friends, and it is a creative outlet. You're role playing, you're having fun, and having a space like that where you're just like hanging out with friends, talking about ridiculous things, and doing something that is creative, but in a completely different way. It is, Kat, the true gifts are the friends. But yeah, I think like friendship and community is really important in being able to overcome burnout and stuff like that, especially because you can lean on those people when you have community, and you have, like, if you're going through something like that, they're likely, if they're in a similar field as you, they know what you're going through, and you can like lean on each other. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think I deeply feel probably like a mashup between Molly and Alexis, where like I did try to pick up knitting as a way to creatively refresh my well, but kind of like what you were saying, Alexis, I also was like, how can I be the best at this? Like, what projects can I take on? I feel the best knitter I've ever, I'll ever be. And so now it's like become a source of creative sadness. But anyway, one of the questions also we got, which is, what are you all working on next?
I'm working on a book about knitting. Monetize. It's actually I'm really excited about it. It's a nonfiction graphic novel about the history of knitting. that I am working on, and I have never done like novel, or it's not a novel, it's a book length nonfiction. So I am in the process of researching it right now.
That is so cool. But I'm just
Yeah, that
thinking
sounds
about
amazing.
drawing knitting. That's gonna look really cool. That sounds amazing.
I was just also going to say that sounds amazing. I'm working on 2 projects. I have another graphic novel coming out, and it's another middle grade graphic novel that I'm excited about. And I'm also working on a YA thriller, which is about 3 girls who find out that they're dating the same guy, but then he goes missing, and then they're accused of his murder. So definitely different different vibes, but that's been a fun experience.
I'm gonna look for that one.
I have a couple things in the works, nothing official yet. I have been working on 2 YA ideas. One's a contemporary romance, a Romeo and Juliet bakery story, which is a popular genre of story about 2 dueling Cuban American bakeries. And then the other one is a Cuban Revolution inspired Second World fantasy about a muralist. That we'll see. We'll see what happens. They've been fun. It's been fun being able to sit down and write prose, especially in like 2 very different genres from Isla, because Isla was very emotionally difficult to work on. As like Lily almost started crying talking about one of the themes of Isla. And Isla's a book that makes people cry, and so it's very difficult to work on. So like I think I just need to like. Yeah, I wanted to just do something fun that wouldn't make me cry. And it was just like a fun adventure, second world fantasy, and a fun romance bakery story to just kind of get away from all the feelings and emotions and tragedy that came with working on that book.
I love how all of your next projects like serve very different niches, but like all niches that I really love. Like when I got some other people into knitting after I was like, look at how great I am at knitting. And then they're like, yeah, but like how is knitting made? Like why would someone knit? And I'm like, I don't know, but I guess I will know when I read your book. I wanted to wait, I had a question that I had. Oh, I wanted to end on, did you have any advice that you got that you found particularly helpful or unhelpful from debut until now?
Like after our debut, or
Yeah, either like for leading up to your act in your life, I guess. Because I was gonna say, oh, from before debut until now, but that's like the whole part of your career, I guess. So any like helpful or unhelpful advice?
I think helpful advice. One thing is, I work in the publishing industry, so I just realized it's so different being on the other side of it, because it's like definitely different being an author versus like making books. And I think one advice that I got was just like get to know the community and like have like good people who are also creative. I have so many good like writing chats and writing friends who I've made throughout my different like prose and like illustration and stuff like that. So having a really great community has been super helpful. I think the advice that like my editor mind is always just like, just work on the next project instead of focusing on just like the selling of the book, because that's not really your job as a creator. Your job is to make the art and just like, but you also still have to do like you also still have fun sharing about your story. I think that has been really helpful for me, like not putting pressure on yourself to be like, oh, I need to like make this milestone or like be at all these places or I'm not on these lists or whatever. I think to me, just like being able to like have fun sharing about my story. Every time someone's like, oh, I never heard about this, but it sounds interesting, I'm like, oh wait, like I just get happy. Like it's not like such a stressful thing. So just being able to enjoy getting other people to know about your stories and your work. And like the most rewarding thing has been like going to events and talking to readers and all of that stuff. So like having fun with how you share your story versus like focusing so much on like, is it like, you know, the biggest thing in the world, but it is the biggest thing in the world to you and to the people who get to read it. So
I would say, like Liz, my day job's in publishing. So before I was published, I knew how the sausage was made. So like I came with my expectations low and like ready. And I feel like, publishing is very opaque and it's difficult for new authors to understand what's happening. And like you said, the way to kind of get through that is to build up a community of like peers who are at the same, you're going on the journey together at the same time. And I have writing friends and I have art friends because I think it's important, because there's a lot about publishing that is very frustrating, but that is not a public grievance to be had, right? Like, so but you still need to express how you're feeling. So being able to have the trusted community of friends where you get to complain or like ask questions like, this thing's happening and I feel like it's kind of weird. Is this a weird thing? And being able to talk to other people to get a broader understanding of what's happening, because publishing can be difficult, is really important. So that would be the advice that I give. And I guess that's advice that I got along the way because I ended up having critique partners and stuff. But I don't know if I've thankfully been given, I mean, I have been given bad advice from people with bad intentions, but
trust no one. That's my advice.
I kind of want to hear what this bad advice is.
It was another panel. I guess like, because when you build those communities, you build up a list of people like, hey, these are the people known within the community that have bad intentions, right? Because that's not really something you could share publicly. So when you have friends and you build community like that, you kind of learn like, oh, this should be avoided, or, those kinds of internal things. That's why it's important. It's like difficult to go into this industry solo, not really knowing those things, because you can't. There are unfortunately bad actors in the community, and if you don't know, then like you can end up in their grasp or whatever, or like or even end up listening to someone who doesn't have your best intentions in mind or whatever, which is like kind of, don't want to end on a bad note. There are also many, many wonderful people in publishing, but like with anything, you gotta watch out and have people you trust and friends to help you get through it.
And I think a really important thing is like asking questions of the people that you can trust. Like there's a sense, like I remember in my debut, I was terrified of like seeming like I didn't know what I was doing, but I didn't know what I was doing. And I realized like about halfway through that no one expected me to know what I was doing because everyone knew that it was my first book. So once I realized that I could just like ask my editor, like, is this how it normally, like how long it normally takes, and like that kind of stuff, and like ask my agent, like, wait, so what happens now, like who is in charge of this part, and just like finding people that you can trust who do not have bad intentions, and then just not trying to hide from them, like desperately hide from them how little understanding you have of the process. It's okay to like ask and find out the answers to your questions. I think that's a really big one.
Yeah, especially from your agent or your editor, they want your book to
Yeah.
sell and go out there. Those are the people that are in your corner, and you should take advantage of those relationships and ask those questions and really, figure out as much as you want the process.
And it was a relationship, like a professional relationship that I hadn't experienced before. So I was like contextualizing it in my brain as kind of like, oh, I'm their employee. Like, I don't want them to like lose confidence in me. So I have to like make them think that I know what's going on. But that's not what it is. Like, you're working together to like get this book out the door, and like the more information you have, like the better for them, so they want to help you make this happen. Like, and like kind of getting my head wrapped around that was like a big moment.
And also I was just gonna say, every book is kind of your first version of trying something, because every book is a different story. So it's like there's going to be different questions that come up. So just being able to ask and, get those answers or get different insights is always super helpful.
Yeah, I think the combination of both, like having a community that you trust and a community that's like really supportive of you and there for you, and also having the ability to ask them those questions and like to ask if your experience or like the things you're experiencing, if they're like something that other people are experiencing or like what is specific to you as well, I think is really helpful to figure out what the norms are, I guess, and like what you should be concerned about. Because if you have never done anything like that, you don't know necessarily like what is not supposed to be happening until like afterwards when it's already too late. Thank you all for joining me and chatting about these books. I had so much fun, and I also had a bunch of other questions that I really loved that we didn't get to, but I'm very excited that we had so much lovely discussion, and thank you as well to the audience people for joining us. The bookshop.org links for everyone's books are below, so you can pick up all of these books and take them with you on the rest of your summer travels, I suppose. And yeah, thank you all to the authors as well for spending our time together with us and just having like a really lovely afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for watching. Thanks, Lily, for organizing this.
Yeah, thank you, Lily.
Yeah,
This was
sure.
great.
Bye,
Yeah, it was
everybody.
lovely.
Bye.